and welcome to another episode of Tell Muses, a podcast by storytellers, with storytellers, for storytellers, and for anyone interested in stories. Today, Simona and I are extra enthusiastic to have with us a personality we both adore. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Alastair, Kevin, Danielle. Woohoo! Welcome, Alastair.
Thank you. Lovely to be here. Lovely to spend time with you.
So, for people who don't know you, would you like to tell, in short, who Alastair Kevin Daniel is, please?
Alastair Kevin Daniel is principally a storyteller, but has a background in education as a teacher. I have taught children of 4 years old and right the way through to people doing their doctorates in later life. So I have an academic background as well as a storytelling background. And what I've tried to do in my work is bring the academic and the storytelling together.
How did your passion for stories start? And how did you become a storyteller?
My interest in the stories started with, storytelling first, was being a teacher. And I was working with children with emotional and behavioral difficulties. So children who were violent sometimes or tried to self-harm. Occasionally that meant a child throwing themselves at a glass window and you having to stop them and hold them. And while I was holding children, stopping them from hurting themselves, I started telling a story to them, and they'd be screaming at me and swearing at me. And as I told the story, because I learnt to tell the story by going, there once was a pig. I wonder what his name was. Do you know what his name was? And then gradually asking questions. To start with, they're screaming and swearing at you. By the end, you're having a hug and they're telling a story with you, which meant we could then go back to learning in the classroom. So that was my sort of introduction to using storytelling. And my enthusiasm for traditional stories came from Into the Woods by Stephen Sondheim. I went to see it, and the show is fantastic. I recommend it to everyone. But I read the program notes. And in the program notes, it talked about Stephen Sondheim being inspired by the uses of enchantment by Bruno Bettelheim. And on the way home from the theatre, I went into a bookshop and bought The Uses of Enchantment by Bruno Bettelheim, and that was it. I was hooked.
So it was books that did it for you first, and then an actual performance, right?
It was storytelling in the classroom, but I wasn't enthusing about traditional stories. I was just making up stories with the children.
Oh, I see.
But then when I saw The Uses of Enchantment, I saw Into the Woods, and then read The Uses of Enchantment, the whole interest in fairy story and folklore started. That's where that came from. I just need to give a health warning, I realise, because the work of Bruno Bettelheim is tainted now. Now they know about his methodologies, so we have to read his book with a critical eye looking at it, but it still was significant for me reading it.
I see. Both Simona and I can relate to that because we have both used storytelling in the classroom and we've seen the actual results at hand. Other than being a wonderful educational tool, I think what you described, that you had, these children, students, and how this got turned upside down, and them actually hugging you and, showing affection. And I think that this is the magic, really, because what storytelling does, other than its educational purpose, it is the bonding.
I think what it did was given a safe space for the child to go into imaginatively. I'm sure the child wanted to hug, not necessarily wanted to hug me, but was desperate. The children don't have behavioral problems for no reason. They come to school with deep problems as to why they behave like they do and why they have their emotional problems. They come from somewhere. And when you manage to take them outside of the awfulness of their life, for some of them, and take them to an imaginary world where actually it's safe to go, I just want to hold you and hug you and just feel safe.
I know exactly what you mean. It's happened to me once when my best was in a panic attack on the phone. We were taking on the phone because she lived in Athens and I'm in Syros, and we were far away, so I couldn't actually be there for her physically. But I just told her a story and it calmed her down. It was incredible. I mean, the effect was immediate. I think this is what you're talking about. I don't have experience of my own with such hardship in kids' lives. I am lucky to say that I haven't had it yet. I can only imagine. But other than you doing that time with those kids, I think you're having an international career. Tell us about it. You keep traveling around.
Yes, and the irony is I'm a stay-at-home boy. I grew up never wanting to travel. I know friends who want to travel all the time, and for me, there was never that in my head. So when I spent 12 years living in Belgium for half the year and traveling backwards and forwards to Belgium and occasionally going to the Netherlands, that was slightly strange. But last week I was in Athens, storytelling in a school in Athens and speaking to a conference on teaching additional languages. And a few weeks before that, I was in Marrakesh for the International Storytelling Festival. I've been to Marrakesh 4 times in 2 years. I think I've had 3 visits to Denmark in the last few years. About 10 years ago, I was teaching storytelling in India. So, yes, Switzerland, Germany, Belgium, Austria, quite a lot of places. The young storytellers are amazing in Marrakesh. I am so full of admiration. And part of our week when I was there on the education week was working with the young storytellers that week. And they are just so open and so full of enthusiasm for story, for storytelling, and for each other and supporting each other. It's wonderful, absolutely wonderful.
So, Alastair, one thing I really, really like about you and your work is how well you can combine your enthusiasm when you tell stories. So, how well you tell stories, but also the academic side, as you called it. So, how well you can think about stories, why stories work in educational settings. And you can rationalize what many of us can only feel as emotions and as things that we see in action, but we cannot really find the why and hows of why these things actually work. And you also try to bring your knowledge and other people's knowledge to other storytelling teachers all over the world with some workshops that you hold once a month with your Facebook group. Can you tell us something about the Facebook group, how it started, the reasons behind that, and how it evolved?
I was a member of the Federation of European Storytelling Schools Group for the UK. And then I don't know if you've heard of this. It's something called Brexit. Sorry if that makes you choke. Unfortunately, Brexit happened and we got cut off at that moment from Federation of European Storytelling because the European Union gives them funds and they're not allowed to use the funds outside the EU. And so there was this gap. So I started a workshop, a peer-to-peer support thing. And very quickly, Hannah Need and Hannah Brailsford, both of whom are storytellers who work in education, came on board and we became co-conveners. So we work equally and support it equally for a peer-to-peer support group for anybody using storytelling in the classroom. And the thing I have to say about it is the generosity of other storytellers. I can't get over it that we have these amazing people and we contact them and say, would you be prepared to do a workshop or a talk for storytellers? There is no money. And they go, yeah, all right. And it's just wonderful. It is absolutely wonderful. And I just sit there sometimes with my mouth open at the brilliance of the people we get to share their knowledge with us. I love that. There's no point in having knowledge and holding on to it. You need to share it with other people. I'm on the board of the Society for Storytelling. And quite often in meetings, I try to bring up the idea of a storytelling ecology. That in our context, in England in particular, there is very poor provision of storytelling in schools, very poor, because people don't see it as important, they don't understand what it is. So trying to create an environment where storytelling is what people are talking about, and people are happy to talk about theory and happy to talk about practice and what it can do in education. And that means enabling storytellers to do that. And I'm quite clear. In Marrakesh, somebody asked if I would help with some research in Marrakesh. And I said, no, that's not my area of expertise. I'm an expert, but I'm an expert in this. I'm an expert in a very small area. So we all need experts in those other areas we don't know about. And I love the fact that people are so good to us and give their time and their expertise.
Actually, we feel the same way with people coming to this podcast. It's exactly.
Hurrah.
Okay, for people who might be interested in this, the group is called Storytelling in Schools.
Yes, Storytellers in Schools Forum on Facebook. There's a very difficult question you have to answer before you become a member. And that question is, are you interested in storytelling in schools? If you can answer yes, you get in. Some people don't seem to be able to answer it, then they don't get let in.
I would have loved to come to some of the meetings you've had so far, but the problem is that it's in the afternoon, and for Simona and I, it's always working hours.
It was big storytelling yesterday, very big storytelling.
We'd both like to come to one of the meetings. It must be so interesting sharing among peers, but we work in the afternoon, so it's very, very hard. And this is why you haven't seen us, not because of lack of interest.
We always provide either a recording or a summary document with information on it, some kind of summary of the session. So people can join Storytellers in Schools Forum, even if they can't come to the meetings, and they have access to all the resources. Because I still teach student teachers, I just say, just go on there, because there's so much information, such a wealth of experience that you can get for free that will help you with your storytelling.
Indeed. And I have seen you sometimes using props with younger children, obviously. You have these little stuffed animals you put in your hands like marionettes.
Yes. Well, because when I first started storytelling, I very quickly ended up working in Belgium. And that means teaching English as an additional language to students. So having realia, having objects that represent language was part of what I was doing. And then having it, I started theorizing around it and realized that what objects do when they work is that they create a concrete link between the story world and the world that the audience and the storyteller are in. So if you have a mouse puppet and this story is about the mouse, then suddenly the mouse is with us in the room. The story world is present in the room. Now, of course, you can go too far. And I have seen students try this where everything is an object and we've stopped using our imaginations. Because the downside is if I show you the mouse puppet and say, this is the mouse, any imaginary mouse you have is wrong because I've said, no, it's this one. So we have to be really careful about using objects and having clear purposes. Why? My favorite object I used in Athens, there's a story with the mouse, is the greatest of all, very well-known Japanese folk tale. And the mouse goes and talks to the sun, to the cloud, to the wind, and to the wall. And I have the mouse, then I have a large sun, and then a cloud, and I take this card cylinder out of my bag with a spring hanging from it. And the children laugh, and I go, I'm sorry, I don't have a cloud. It's the closest I've got to a cloud. I said, well, you've got to use our imaginations. We'll see it as a cloud. And they go, all right. The father talks, the mouse talks to the cloud, but it's a thunder drum that when you shake it, it produces the noise of thunder. And I love that because it's not visually the object, it's aurally the object. And it changes, again, changes the room. And using that changes how I have to speak. Because now I've got the noise of thunder going on behind me, and it changes how I physicalize, how I hold my body, how I use my breath, all of those things. So it takes me down a particular performance route using it that I like. I have used objects where it's done that and I don't like it, and I stop using the object. If the object makes me work in a particular way, but not in a good way, I don't use it. Yesterday, I was telling The Canterville Ghost by Oscar Wilde with a lot of young people in Leuven. Sir Simon de Canterville, the ghost, is a life-size puppet. And he appears sort of 10 minutes into the story. And the students always react to that. And I use him because he needs to interact with the students. The ghost has to interact with the students. He can float, he can move, he's not on solid ground. If I play the ghost, and I do act as the ghost during the story, but often it's him and he gets to float around the stage and talk to the students, and it changes the nature of the storytelling in a way I really like. And I know as I'm saying this that there may be storytellers listening to this who are getting very cross with me because they would say that's not storytelling.
Of course it is. There's not one kind of storytelling, for crying out loud. Anyway, it's like maths. You can get to the same result through different routes. It's not one particular way that does it. Okay, it's what
Look,
works for each one.
Despina, you know you are talking to someone who was originally a maths teacher. So, yeah.
You know exactly what I mean. It's just a metaphor. You can see the analogy.
Yeah.
So I was having several inspiring ideas while you were talking, my friend.
Yeah.
So one of them was that we can see the two sides of using props, obviously. As you say, you might limit the use of imagination for some people. On the other hand, as there are two sides to this, there are some people whose brain, it's not a malfunction, it's a way their brain functions. They have this thing called aphantasia. So they cannot produce the images, for example. So for them, it will work even better, I can imagine. Other than that, I have had this epiphany. So we do not want to limit to one kind of mouse. We want them to imagine their own mouse. So if there's time working with the students, we could have them, let's say, for example, draw their own mouse and then use their drawings in one scene after another. So you have all kinds of the same mouse, taking part.
You could take the drawings into Kamishibai and use them in Kamishibai storytelling, which I have not done very much of, but I love. I love doing when I have done it, and I love watching it.
I've bought myself the box, but have been too lazy to actually draw something yet. I have it. At some point, I'm going to use it.
I made my own box, and I made images to tell the story, the opening of A Midsummer Night's Dream, Shakespeare. And I was with postgraduates. So we are talking people who are at least 22 years old, most of them older. And I put the box in front of them and it was tied, locked with a silk rope. And I untied the silk rope and started telling the story and gently opened the doors on the Kamishibai frame. Anybody who doesn't know what we're talking about, look it up on the internet. And I then stopped and I said to them, what is going on here? And they looked at each other. I said, you are completely silent. All of you are leaning forward and you are completely silent. And all I have done is released some silk rope and opened some doors. And I've got you. It's amazing. Yeah, it's so powerful. Yes. I love it. I mean, when I did my doctorate is in the comparison of ritual and performance, the theatre performance, and the crossover of ritual and theatre performance. And that moment in Kamishibai is the perfect example of it. It is just how that just comes together, ritual and theatrical performance as a lead into storytelling is so powerful, so simple and so powerful.
It's like a magician's trick. People are waiting to see what comes out of the hat.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think it's what, yeah, I love it.
And if they're holding their breath, even better.
Yes. Yeah.
It's wonderful when you use props that really work with the story that you're telling. I remember last year I was telling stories in a school and I told the story of the drum. It's an Indian folktale where the boy wants a drum and through generosity, at the end, he gets the drum, even if he's really poor. And I told the whole story with a chair behind me. I usually have a chest on the chair and I take things out of the chest. Is a magical chest for the kids. And I covered the chair with a blanket, a sheet. And behind the chair, I put my djembe. And at the end of the story, when I told the students and he got the drum and he started playing the drum, I got the djembe out. So it was covered and they were all like, it's as if they had gotten inside the story in that moment. And they said, and he started playing and they all started dancing and they all stood up and they started dancing around and they wanted me to keep playing and playing because they wanted to be inside the story. And they felt as if they were the participant to this wedding where he gets given the drum. And it was such a wonderful moment.
Yeah, I have used percussion instruments I have a box of them with a small group of children, the way we all take them, and I tell a story from Zimbabwe, which is their version of Beauty and the Beast, which is the snake chief. And there is the wedding procession through the forest, and we all have the musical instruments, and we sing as we go through the forest with the musical instruments. It's not Zimbabwe, sorry. That's the book version. I say that because I've just remembered the song we sing is in Xhosa, so it's a Xhosa story.
Musical instruments and theatrical techniques and all that stuff can be part of storytelling. It's very clear to all of us that it's not theater. What we do is not theater, but there are parts of it in it, especially if you want to make it interactive with the people or the kids in particular. It works very well. So, for example, when you were talking about the ghost, you have to play the part as part of the storytelling, and then you have participants make up their own ghost or how their ghost would move. So it's not simply one particular way you show them. So this can be another way of interaction. But we can go on talking and talking and talking, and then I'll forget to ask for a story. So, Alastair, is there one particular story that is struggling to get out of your mind and through your mouth and into our ears right now?
I'll tell you the story that I heard when I was 11 years old. And at school, the head teacher told us this story. In England, we normally have an assembly in the morning in school where the children gather together. And he told us I didn't know it was a Grimm's fairy tale then. It's not a fairy tale, a wonder tale. And he told us that story, and I have remembered it for the rest of my life. And I have told it regularly. And I had an occasion where I thought I was telling to the children. I was obviously telling to the teacher, who told me a year later that story had changed her family life. So this is the story of the grandfather and his grandchildren. And this is how I will tell it to you. Once, long ago, there was a family, a mother, a father, and 2 children, a boy and a girl, and living with them was the children's grandfather. And the family lived well together. They weren't wealthy. They only had a poor house. They only had the essentials to live, but they were happy. But some things happen as you get older that are not so good. And grandfather was finding it quite difficult to control a spoon when he was eating his soup. Now, at the moment, I'm wearing a patterned shirt. You can't see it, but I'm wearing a patterned shirt because I'm reaching that age now where if I eat, I quite often end up wearing some of the food. And that's the point that grandfather had reached. So the food, as he ate his soup, was sometimes going down his shirt, sometimes going on the table. And in the end, mother said to him, grandfather, what a mess you're making. I'm really worried that you cannot control that spoon and your bowl. That bowl is made out of clay that's been baked. It's fragile. You are going to break it. Tomorrow night, you will eat out of a wooden bowl with a wooden spoon. You're much less likely to break that. So the next night, while the rest of the family ate out of pottery bowls with metal spoons, grandfather ate out of a wooden bowl using a wooden spoon. Now, I don't know if you have tried to eat soup with a wooden spoon. Soup clings to a wooden spoon more than it does to a metal spoon. So the inevitable was that grandfather ended up spilling more of the soup on the table than he had eating with a metal spoon. And when they saw the mess, the father said, oh, grandfather, what a mess you've made of the table. Tomorrow night, you can eat sitting on the floor. So the next night, while the mother, the father, and the 2 children sat at the table eating from pottery bowls with metal spoons, grandfather sat on the floor eating with a wooden bowl and a wooden spoon. Now, I'm sure you can imagine how hard it is for someone who's getting on in years to sit on the floor and eat food. I was working in a school this week and I was saying to the students, I'm just going to sit down. And then when I stand up, it may take me a little time because I'm reaching that point where getting up and getting down to the floor is quite difficult. And for grandfather, it was worse than it is for me. So you can imagine what happened. He didn't just spill some soup from his spoon. He dropped the whole bowl of soup on the floor. And mother and father looked at the mess and they said, Grandfather, grandfather, what a mess you've made. We cannot have you eating like this in the house. Tomorrow night, you can eat outside from the pig's trough. So the next night, while mother and father and the children sat at the table eating from pottery bowls with metal spoons, grandfather tried to eat his soup from the pig's trough outside. This went on for several days. And then on the Friday, it was time to go to the market. So mother and father left the children at home with grandfather and they went off to the market. When they came home, they found the children playing. Now, when I say playing, sometimes we think that's something that's not important. But for me as a teacher, play is very important and very serious. And if the parents looked at the children playing, they would see that the children were playing at being carpenters, at making. The parents looked at the children and said, oh, what are you playing at? And the children said, we are making. And the parents said, what are you making? And the children said, we're making a surprise. And father said, who is the surprise for? And mother said, it's the surprise for us. And the children nodded and said, yes, it's a surprise for you. And we can't know what it is, asked mother and father. And the children whispered to each other. And then they said, all right, we'll tell you. We are making pig's troughs for you for when you get older. That night, mother and father and the children sat at the table eating their soup from pottery bowls with metal spoons. And sitting at the table eating with them from his own pottery bowl and metal spoon was grandfather. For the family that eats together, lives together, and loves together. And that is my story of the grandfather and his grandchildren. And that is how I have told it to you.
Such a wonderful story and such a wonderful telling and such a wonderful meaning of this story.
The teacher said to me, a year ago, you told that story to my children, my class. My mother-in-law has dementia, and it is very difficult to live with her. And every time things get difficult, I remember that story.
It's perfect. First of all, it addresses people's age racism, I think, because sometimes we forget how much patience is required when dealing with parents who are growing old. It's a great reminder. And the example you give to your kids is the best way. I have heard this story, another version of it, with a chicken coop. And I love the way you say, Alastair, that this is the way I told it to you, because this is like a disclaimer. No one can tell you, you didn't tell it right. This is not the proper way. There's another version. So this is my version. This is the way I tell it. It's lovely.
I stole that. All storytellers are thieves. And I stole it from Sandra Pollerman, an American storyteller. And I went to a workshop of hers when I was a teacher, and she said that sometimes she would tell children a story of Cinderella, and the children would go, no, it's not like that. This is what happens in Story of Cinderella. So she always says, this is the story of Cinderella, and this is how I tell it.
Exactly. Yeah.
So you are saying this is this. Now I changed that because in this context, this is monologic. It's me talking to you. But when I'm storytelling live, I try to make my storytelling dialogic, not monologic. So I would actually say, this is the story of the grandfather and the grandchildren, and this is how you and I will tell it. And then at the end, I say, that was the story, and that was how you and I told it.
Perfect. So you include the audience. That's even
Yes.
better. Yeah.
Yes.
But it's not that storytellers are thieves. All artists are thieves.
All artists. Yes, it's Jack Zipes said, all storytellers are thieves and forgers. We steal our tales and we forge them anew.
Exactly. Well, there's nothing new under the sun, right?
No. Yep.
I wanted to ask you, Alastair, when you tell, do you prefer young audience or adults? What's your favorite kind of listeners?
My favorite kind of listeners are ones who enjoy story. I love telling with young children. I did a family event last year and I was in the middle of a story and it set up a difficulty for the king. And one of the small children just went, well, that's a problem. And I went, oh, why is it a problem? And we had this whole conversation about what the problem was and why it was sick. And I love that. But I also love telling to adults. I love telling to adults. Apart from anything else, you can tell a lot of different stories with adults that may not be appropriate for children.
Yeah.
And I used to tell the story of Frankenstein when I was younger and fitter. I say that because the creature was a puppet that was bigger than me, a full body puppet.
Wow.
And I used to get at the end of that story, and I only told that with older students and adults. And at the end of that story, I would have to stop the tears because I was moved every time by the end of that story. And I couldn't tell that with young children. So there's that enjoyment of being able to do more complex stuff with adults, though you can do complex stuff with children. The week after next, I'm in a primary school in England working with 9 and 10-year-olds, telling the story of A Midsummer Night's Dream. A third of the storytelling, it's an hour and a half, 90 minutes. So 30 minutes of that at least will be in Shakespeare's original language.
Do you think the children will be able to cope?
They love it. They absolutely love it. One of my students watched me do this. And he said, I want to do this. I want to do A Midsummer Night's Dream with my children in school when I go on school experience, on my practice. And my colleague and I said, okay, yeah, how can we help you? What do you want to do? What's the age you're working with? He said, reception, 4 and 5-year-olds. And I want to use Shakespeare's language. Okay. So we worked with him on how to do it, and he only told the fairies story. For those who don't know, A Midsummer Night's Dream has 3 stories, one of which is the fairies story. So he told the fairies story, and we went to watch him work, and he told the story, and we videoed it. And he was bringing children out of the audience to help him tell the story. And he said, Titania, queen of the fairies, is asleep. Who wants to be Titania? And one of the children, oh, me. So he took one of the children as Titania. And so you have to be asleep. So she was asleep. And who's going to be Bottom? And here comes Bottom. And Bottom has been turned into a donkey. And he asked the children, what do donkeys do when they sing? And all the children went, Eeyore, Eeyore. So he said, okay, so you sing. And the child went, Eeyore, Eeyore. And he said, and Titania woke up. And the child wakes up. And she said, what you do is, with the way that I work, you say something and the child repeats it. So she said, my ear, and just, my ear is much enamored of thy note, of thy note. This is a 4-year-old. And he said, I wonder what she means. My ear is much enamored of thy note. And one of the other children says, it means she loves his music.
Wow, age 4 and 5?
Yeah, never underestimate children. And this is a school in an area of social need. It's a really diverse classroom. There was a child in the classroom. This was March. She had been in school since September, and she had not done any mark making, the things you do before writing. She had not shown anything. They had no evidence. And after this storytelling, she wrote a poem to Titania. Now, it's in what we call emergent writing. So some people would unfortunately call it scribble. We don't call it scribble. We call it emergent writing. So she had to read it to the teacher. But she went from nothing to writing a poem to Titania. That's the power of storytelling.
Yeah, absolutely. Alastair, you mentioned, so now you mentioned A Midsummer's Night Dream. Earlier you mentioned Frankenstein and the Canterville Ghost. So these are all authored stories. How is your process when you go from an authored text, so not a folktale that has been written down by someone, but usually told orally from a written text authored by someone who created the story to oral version of the telling. So how much of the original language do you use? How is your process?
I do the same process as I do with any storytelling of mapping the story and working out whose story I need to tell and whose story I can ignore. I then write a theatrical script as a starting point. So I'm taking which characters need to say what, and I put the narrator does this. And so I have that script and I learn that script, but then I sort of ignore it because it's storytelling and it's dialogic. If I'm doing Shakespeare, there has to be key Shakespeare speeches. They have to be there. But around it, around those speeches, my storytelling is changing depending on the audience because I'm talking with them and telling the story with them. It's quite an interesting process. I said Frankenstein. I had been so busy. I went to Belgium with Frankenstein and I had not rehearsed it once. I had learnt the story, but I had not rehearsed it. And I was in this school and I thought, I've got the lunch hour. I'm doing a school story in the morning, then I've got lunch hour, then I've got Frankenstein. I'll rehearse it in the lunch hour. I arrived in the school and they said, we've switched the stories. You're doing Frankenstein at 9 o'clock. So I had to do Frankenstein with no rehearsal, with a life-size puppet that's bigger than me, involving the audience. So I improvised it for an hour and a half. And I have to say, it's one of the best things I've ever done in my life. I never changed it after that. I just kept it because it worked so well. I'm not recommending it as a process because I can tell you the stress levels were unbelievable. And luckily for me, it worked. And a lot of that, of course, is because we are co-creating, it's the audience as much as me. If the audience were not prepared to go with me, it would have just crashed and I would have crashed with it. But they weren't, they went with me. And it was absolutely wonderful. But normally I do rehearse. I will be rehearsing in Midsummer Night's Dream.
As you should, as all of us should.
Yeah. But not rehearsing it to the point where apart from the speeches I have to give, I deliberately don't learn the story part word for word, not the script.
The bare bones always.
Yes.
Yeah, that's how it works. I wanted to ask you, well, obviously literary tales are part of what you really like. What other genres do you enjoy telling?
I've sort of been going on a journey investigating stories of my own land, if you like, because I'm from a part of England that lost its folk traditions very early.
Alastair is a Kent man.
No, he's not. No, he is not, Despina.
Is he not?
No, he is a man of Kent.
Oh, right. Pardon.
And this is part of it because my part of England, the Vikings invaded and they stopped at the river and they drove the Celts to the west of the river and the Vikings were on the east of the river. That was 1,500 years ago. And we still refer to each other by different names depending on which side of the river you are from. So if you are from the Celtic side, you are a Kentish man. If you're from the Viking side, you're a man of Kent. And looking at me, I know the listeners can't see me, but you look at me and you see a Viking. Yeah.
We can do that.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Yep.
This is a matter like how you have your scones, let's say.
Yes, well, the word scone in English is a contested word. And there's some really interesting research into how different people say the word S-C-O-N-E, scone. And where I'm from, it's scone. If you're a working class, it's scone. If you are middle class, it is scone. And that switches all over England.
That makes me middle class in all languages. Makes perfect sense, actually. So you are looking for stories from your part of the wood.
And there are not many that are preserved. So I've been looking in a lot of books to find some. And there's a few stories that were told to Charles Dickens. Charles Dickens lived in England. Sorry, of course he lived in England. He lived in Kent. When he was a small boy, his nursemaid, his governess, told him stories of Kent. So there's a record. He wrote down those stories. So we've got a few of those stories. And there are stories from around the place and legends. A lot of them have the devil in them. And I'm really excited to find those stories. And at the moment, I'm working on a show about smuggling because in the 18th century, my part of England was like the Wild West. In the 18th century, if the smugglers were coming through, the army went to the pub and locked the door. So it was really lawless, a lawless land. And it's only sort of researching this, I find that I grew up in a tiny hamlet. We had one streetlight. That was it. You know, it was tiny. And there was a battle going through our village, 200 years ago. And I had no idea. Nobody ever mentioned this when I was a child. So I'm enjoying finding out about my people's past.
Your heritage.
Yes, I also have Jewish heritage. So I love Jewish stories as well, because my grandfather was Jewish.
I was thinking, maybe would you like to tell us one of these stories, either a Kentish story or a Jewish story to finish with?
So I think of one that's short enough.
If you need to go for a longer story, it's fine with us. It's up to you.
Oh, okay. Okay.
I love Jewish stories. They're so nice.
I do. Okay. I said I'm on the board of the Society for Storytelling. I'm the education lead on the board. And this year I've been working with National Astronomy Week in the UK, helping create storytelling resources to teach about the moon. So I worked with them on a story called The Sages of Helm. And so this is the story of the Sages of Helm, but this is how I will tell it to you. In the Jewish tradition, when we talk about the wise fool or the foolish wise person, stories will often travel to Poland, to the east of Poland, to the city of Helm. And so that's where we're going for the story of the Sages of Helm. Because the sages, the wise people of Helm, had noticed something about the moon. They'd noticed it wasn't always there at night. And we're talking about a time before electricity was being used to give light. There were gas lights in some places, but Helm had very few lights in the streets. So people relied on the light of the moon to feel safe when they walked the streets after the sun had gone down. And here was the moon disappearing over the month. So they had to work out why the moon was disappearing. And then they realized the answer was obvious. They were having to share the moon with someone else. And someone else was using the light. When they were using the light, the city of Helm only had a little bit of the moon. And obviously, when the sages of Helm were using the whole of the moon, the other place only had a little bit of the moon. So the sages of Helm decided that the city needed its own moon. So they decided to go and find one and buy it, which meant that everybody had to contribute silver. And so everybody put in silver candlesticks, the occasional menorah, cutlery, plates, until the sages of Helm, the wise folk of Helm, had a sack of silver. And they put the sack of silver on a cart and rode off to find their own moon. The night they rode off, they really realized how much they needed a moon, because there was no moon in the sky at all. They had their lanterns to lead them on their way, and that was the only light they had. As they traveled, they had to stay and sleep in inns. Actually, that's wrong. They didn't stay and sleep in inns. What am I saying? They wanted to save all the silver to buy their own moon, didn't they? They didn't want to spend it on sleeping in inns. So they slept in barns next to inns and paid the smallest amount of money they could so that they had enough silver to buy a moon. As they traveled after a couple of days, they looked up in the sky when they settled down to sleep in the barn, and through the open door, they could see a sliver of the moon in the sky. And they realized that where they were staying and where they were sleeping, these poor people were sharing their moon with someone else as well. So there was no point trying to buy a moon from them. And then over the next couple of nights, as they slept, they noticed there was a little more of the moon. Yet again, people sharing their moon with other people. They were in the same trouble as the people of Helm were, as the sages of Helm were. And so on they went, and they traveled for 2 weeks. And after 2 weeks, they paid to sleep in a barn. And as they were going into the barn, they looked up in the sky, and over them was a full moon. And the sages of Helm looked up in the night sky at the full moon. They looked at its beauty, at its blueness, and they sighed. The landlord of the inn, which the barn belonged to, heard them sighing and said, I see, you're looking at the full moon. Isn't it beautiful? I understand why you are sighing. And the sages of Helm said, oh, yes, we're sighing because we want one like this. That's why we're traveling. We're traveling to buy our own moon for the city of Helm. The landlord stuck his finger in his ear and wiggled it to make sure that he was hearing properly. And he said, you want to buy a moon? And the sages of Helm said, yes, look, we have this sack of silver here, and we're prepared to pay this whole sack of silver just to have our own moon. The landlord looked at the sack of silver. He looked inside it. He saw all the cutlery, the spoons, the forks, the knives, the candlesticks, the menorahs, and he said, ah, as it happens, I might have a spare moon. Now, normally I would charge a lot more than this sack of silver, but because you are such nice people, I am prepared to give you a moon, just like the one in the sky, for your poor sack of silver. Just wait here. I need to go and fetch it. It's in the other barn. In 5 minutes, come and find me round the corner outside the other barn. So the sages of Helm waited for 5 minutes. They didn't have watches, so they just had to count the seconds. 1, 2, 3, 4. It's amazing how long 5 minutes can feel when you're really waiting for something, isn't it? 15, 16, 17. I'm going to cut the 5 minutes for you rather than just count all the way through. So we'll get to the end of 5 minutes, and the sages of Helm left the barn that they were to sleep in, went round the corner, and there was another barn, and standing outside it was the landlord. And standing in front of him was a large wooden barrel with a lid on it. He said, come, gather round, come and stand round the barrel. So the sages of Helm went and stood round the barrel, which was standing in the open air under a beautiful dark sky with a beautiful full moon directly above them. The landlord said, is this what you are looking for? And he took the lid off the barrel, and the barrel was full of water, and floating in the surface of the water, the sages of Helm saw the moon. Oh, yes, that's exactly what we want, said the sages of Helm. You have a moon in a barrel? And the landlord put the lid back on the barrel of water and said, yes, and it's yours. But we need to nail the lid down, because if you take the lid off too often or keep it off too long, the moon will jump straight out and go back in the sky. So he nailed the lid down, and the sages of Helm gave him their bag of silver. The next morning, they loaded their barrel with the moon in it onto their cart, and they set off back home. Of course, it took them 2 weeks to get home. And over the 2 weeks, they noticed that as they went back through the other villages and stayed in the barns by the inns in those villages, and when they looked through the open door into the night sky, the poor people there still had only a sliver of the moon, half a moon, 3/4 of a moon. They still were sharing their moon with other people, the poor folk. So 2 weeks later, and of course, a month had passed since they had left Helm, so they returned to Helm on a dark night with no moon in the sky. And as they entered Helm, people heard the cart and the hooves of the donkeys on the cobblestones, and they came out of their houses and they brought lanterns, and the sages of Helm said, we have our moon. So the people gathered round the barrel, and the sages of Helm removed all of the nails except the last one, for they left that for the rabbi to remove. And the rabbi removed the last nail. And then one of the sages of Helm said, "Look, here is your moon." And he lifted the lid off the barrel of water under a dark, moonless sky. And of course, it wasn't there. They splashed around in the water to see if it had sunk to the bottom, but still it wasn't there. They looked at each other, they couldn't understand, and then they realized what must have happened. While they were sleeping one night, well, someone had gone, crept into the barn that they were sleeping in, opened the barrel and taken their moon. So they had spent all their silver and still had no moon. And if you go to Helm now, you will find they are still sharing their moon with other people, because sometimes it is full, sometimes it is 3/4, sometimes it is half, sometimes it is a sliver, and sometimes there is no moon at all in the sky. But of course, Helm does have electric lighting now, but sadly, it doesn't have any Jews anymore. But that's another story for another time. And that's the story of the sages of Helm, and that's how I told it to you.
Yay!
I missed out all the technical, but working with National Astronomy Week, I had to include words like gibbous, half moon, quarter moon.
First time I heard you tell that story, I had to use a word reference dictionary because I was not familiar with the terms.
Okay, I removed because I thought I need to keep it short for you for this recording.
It was lovely. Thank you kindly for your time and for your stories and for doing this with us.
It's been lovely to chat to you, and thank you very much for inviting me. I'm very, very, very happy to have taken part and very touched that you asked. Thank you.
Awesome.
Thank you so much.
So